Today's 0.5% increase in the base rate is yet another sign of economic difficulties to come. When the banks pass it on, it'll mean an extra $2,500 a year on repayments for a standard $500,000 mortgage. And that's just this rate rise, not the other two we've already had in recent months. The Reserve Bank's aim, by raising the cash rate, is to reduce liquidity in the economy, to restrain spending and therefore put downward pressure on inflation, which is currently running at just over 5%, but expected to be over 7% by the end of the year. But this is far from the only pressure point on everyone's cost of living. Grocery prices, well, they're up 12% on average over the past year. Then there's the fuel price, that's up 30% over the past 6 months, set to spike again in a couple of months, as I said a little bit earlier, when Scott Morrison's cut to the excise or the fuel tax goes back on. By then, some pundits say we'll be paying around $3 a litre, if you can believe it. And then there's power prices that are about to rise nearly 20% in New South Wales and Queensland, although a little less at this stage in other states. Part of the problem has been the massive expansion of liquidity, or put simply, government spending like drunken sailors during the pandemic. Now, some of it was worthy, absolutely, given governments locked people in their homes and closed their businesses, but some of it was just sheer waste. Beyond government spending, part of the problem is also ongoing supply chain disruption caused by COVID lockdowns and shortages of staff here and abroad. The port of Shanghai is just the most recent example, one of the world's busiest ports, grinding to a halt. Part of the problem also is ongoing energy price spikes caused by the war in Ukraine. And part is labour shortages caused by the cessation of immigration, ongoing COVID isolation rules, and the changed culture of work after pandemic hibernation. The upshot of this is that life will be tougher for nearly all of us. The earlier demand-driven asset price inflation or housing boom made at least some of us richer. But it's the current inflation hit to all things that we have to buy day to day that's going to make us nearly all poorer in the medium term. And yes, in countries like ours, we're coming off a high base. Still, it's not easy, and it's not going to be easy, especially for generations who've seen at a macro level nothing but the good times roll on for the past 30 years. The Albanese government is lucky that all of this is happening at the start of its term, in the honeymoon period, when voters are inclined to give governments the benefit of the doubt. Labor's challenge will be to avoid making a bad situation worse. And that'll be hard given the government has promised even higher taxpayer spending on aged care, on childcare and on Medicare. And the government has also promised to shield workers from the pain of inflation, even though an inflation wage rise could readily give way to an inflationary spiral. Add to all of this the government's determination to do more on climate, and almost inevitably this is going to lead to even higher prices and more instability across our power grid. Australia's prosperity is almost entirely dependent on exports of minerals, on iron ore, on coal and gas. That's what we need in order to pay for all the imported goods we want in this country. Yet these are the very resources that the Green Movement demonises and now demands we leave in the ground because of their associated emissions. This year, our resource exports will hit $405 billion, including $133 billion from iron ore, $100 billion from coal, and $70 billion from gas. So 3/4 of the total is emissions intensive. And presumably in the gun sights of an emissions sensitive government and all those activists that like to blockade roads and bridges. So while they've got a honeymoon at the moment, the reality is that this is not exactly a happy place for the Albanese government, or at least it won't be when voters start to feel the pain that's coming. The new Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, seems pretty alert to what's ahead, and he's promising restraint in the coming budget. But whether he can control his colleagues, well, that remains to be seen. As well as a new search for savings, There should be plenty of that amidst the myriad of activities of government we have at a federal level, and he should be winding that spending back. But if he was smart, Chalmers would declare a no spending rule, no new spending whatsoever, and then if there was new spending, require that to be funded entirely from finding savings in the existing budget. Part of our current difficulty is the massive expansion of government regulation and processes that's making getting anything done almost impossible. Take energy. It's clear that what we need is more dispatchable power in our system. Instead, we've got a national energy market that's become almost unmanageable, with an Australian energy market operator, one federal and 6 state and territory governments all making their own uncoordinated decisions, and an energy security board, all of them trying to keep the lights on while avoiding the only means that can, namely new fossil fuel power. It's all very well proposing a so-called capacity mechanism, but unless someone will actually produce the extra coal or gas-fired power we need, it won't keep the lights on. It's just a mechanism, a bit of regulation. Now maybe, just maybe, Anthony Albanese will turn out to be the new Bob Hawke that he wants to be, a unifying figure who defied left-wing stereotypes and led a genuinely reforming Labor government. But that's a lot to expect, requiring quite a transformation from the left-wing Tory fighter of just a few years back. Without it though, fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a wild economic ride.